Welcome back to City and State TV. I'm Gerson Borrero, and we're going to have a fascinating conversation about something that, quite frankly, has me puzzled because it's about education, opting out of tests, and I just don't get it. And Derrell Bradford, who is actually executive director of NICAN.
NICAN, yeah.
Or ICAN. Yeah, what is it? You call it ICAN. Which is, explain first of all, in the context that we're going to discuss, this actual study that came out, this report of students in New York's biggest, 5 biggest cities who overwhelmingly opted into the New York State exam. First of all, your organization, NICAN. Tell me in that your head, what does it do? How does it play a role in this whole education process? I know you're very involved, and people can Google him, and you can see he's very active in education of America, really.
Yeah. So thanks for having me, of course. So NICAN, or ICAN, the New York Campaign for Achievement Now, is part of a series of state-based groups that work on education policy, primarily in the Northeast, but there's a Minnesota CAN and there's a Carolina CAN. We are supported by a national team that does research and some other things in Washington, but the individual executive directors set their own agendas in the states. And here in New York, what I've been very focused on are issues around standards and assessments, teacher evaluation, and parent choice in education. And I'm delighted, actually, to be working with the Higher Achieving New York Coalition to really inform people about why we have assessments, like why we test, like why it is important that parents continue to opt in to a process about transparency and fairness that is vital both for us as citizens and as advocates to hold like public education, big P, big E, accountable, and more specifically to make sure that kids who are historically underserved, low-income kids, African-American, Hispanic kids in particular, that they get the best teachers and the kind of opportunities they need to be the people that they actually want to be.
And testing will give you that? When we have, I'm going to give you an example, and before we get it, because I think this report, it says a lot in terms of who's opting out, who's opting in, and the people that actually are in better school districts are the ones that are saying, let's opt out. But as I understand it, and correct me if I'm wrong, they're really impacting the students that are at the bottom of the totem pole in terms of learning or access or better education system.
Right.
Is that something along the lines of what this study demonstrates? And I'll get back to, because I want to get to are we getting the bang for the dollar? And we're spending billions of dollars in these United States. I don't have to tell you that, and it's wasted, most of it. But let's get back to this.
So and just aside, it's sort of fascinating. Like New York City in particular spends more money on public education than like the entire state budgets of many states. So
these 5 boroughs.
Yeah, yes, yeah, just alone. Right. I mean, it's amazing math. So standards have a partner, and the partner are assessments, because like you can't just draw a line in the sand and have no way to figure out whether or not the line is straight or crooked. And so the standards and assessments as like pals really find their root in the passage of the No Child Left Behind Act.
Okay.
So there were always standards, but they were all over the place before, and there were assessments, but they were rarely used for anything in terms of like personnel or personnel decisions or any of these other things. And Ted Kennedy and then George Bush decided that, like, look, we want every state to test because we send the states money. You cannot test, but we won't send you any money. So that was the deal.
Right.
And more importantly, we want you to set a goal that in 14 years, all of your kids, including the ones who are least served, are at 100% proficiency. And so, we joke about this a lot, whether or not 100% proficiency is ever actually attainable. My feeling on that was always, if you'd set the goal at more, you might get some. If you set the goal at all, you will get more, right? So just as like a public policy standpoint, it doesn't make sense to say we're going to get 50% better when the dream is to get everyone better. But the real hook in No Child Left Behind was that for the first time, states, big districts like New York City in particular, had to report out not just what the overall scores were, but what the scores were for specific groups of kids. So like for the first time, you find out that like in a district that is, let's say, 50% high income and 30% middle income and 20% low income, that the low income kids were doing horribly. Before, the district would have just reported out all the results together, and they would have homogenized away what was happening to the kids at the bottom. So all of a sudden, we had all this new information that was telling us, it's like, wow, there are all these places that we thought were okay, where these specific kids are really getting the short end of the stick. And that information spurred, in a lot of respects, like the modern era of education change. So when people are talking about charter schools, or talking about teacher evaluation, or all kinds of student funding arrangements like weighted student formulas, which mean that kids who have higher needs actually get more money. All of that stuff grew out of the fact that we had standards, or that at least states were trying to reach 100% proficiency, and then we had assessments that actually reported out the data. So that movement has been enormously important, most specifically for the kids who are historically least served by big public education writ large. Now, if you fast forward 14 years, whatever, you get us now. And some people would argue that too much is being done too fast. Like maybe there's some legitimate concern there. Too much is being done too fast.
For whom? But wait a minute. Are we talking here about educating the next generation, the future leaders? So how could that be even said or thought, that too much is being done too fast? And I tell you, I go back to the bank, because it's interesting you say that at some point, where it's Kennedy and Bush and Kennedy, whoever you want to give credit to, is No Child Left Behind. They talk about, we're not going to send you money, but it's not their damn money. It's the people's money. I always get, people talk about the federal budget. Oh, we're sending federal dollars. Well, fool, it's coming out of my pocket. Yeah. And most people know that. State funds, oh, the governor's going to approve a budget. It's not your money, governor. I don't care what governor is. The mayor, oh, we got a city, but that's not your money. It's the people's money. My problem is, and I tell you, and I know that you're an expert on this, and sometimes we get caught up in analyzing these studies and who opted in, who opted out, how it impacts. The truth is, we're not getting the bang for the dollar.
So I would argue, there was a great New York Times piece about this, about whether or not there's...
those are real common people.
Yeah.
New York Times folks. Yeah. They're writing from an ivory tower. They really understand people in Bushwick, and they understand, they really understand about education.
In this instance,
I'm sorry.
No, it's all right. In this instance, they were down with the proletariat. So
I can tell you this. Somebody's got to have a... I'm not going to sit here and, I understand and I respect what you do. And you do it with commitment. But I see too many interest groups in all of this.
Yeah, so I'm going to make this point, and then I will affirm precisely what you have said. So the article was just about whether or not there's a crisis in education in New York. And there was a professor who basically said, look, if chronic mediocrity is a crisis, then there's a crisis, right? So if you look at the results on the NAEP, which is our national, only thing we have that's close to a national assessment, we've been doing the same forever. Right. So despite the fact that we're spending more and more money over time, and so I happen to think that's a problem. I do think the fact that our kids aren't getting better at a rate that is consistent with the way kids in Poland or some of the other countries.
Cuba.
That's right.
Communist Cuba. They spend less than we do, and they have a 98%
literacy rate. That's right. And most of these countries, what's interesting is that they're actually accelerating their move from the bottom to the top. The rate is what matters. And then the countries at the top is it's China, it's Finland, Singapore, these other places. I mean, they've taken Finland in particular has taken...
Let me ask you a stupid question.
Sure.
Because you're the expert. Shouldn't we be copying from them instead of trying to fight amongst ourselves and maybe adopting what their standards are? I'm asking.
So that's a great question. It's two questions. So from the international point of view, the top 5 countries are all getting to the top differently. And I think that's a really important lesson. So Finland decided that they were going to make it really hard to actually be a teacher. So getting into a college of education to be a teacher in Finland is like getting into MIT here. And so 1 in 10 prospective elementary school teachers actually makes it into the classroom. And that is absolutely not the case in the United States. So like they made a real investment in talent there.
Should we then start with the teachers that we're preparing to uneducate our population?
So colleges of education are like a really important link in all of this because teachers matter.
Does it begin there? The failure begin at the colleges?
So I would say that it is. You could hang the problem on lots of different institutions.
I'll hang it on the university that are teaching our teachers to uneducate our population. Which by the way, we're talking about a world economy, a global economy, competitive as hell, and we're falling behind by leaps and bounds, and that hasn't stemmed the tide.
So teacher education is a volume business, not a quality business, and I don't say that to disrespect teaching. Like Miss McCullough was the most important. She was a teacher I had when I was 9. She was the most important teacher in my life. I owe my life to her. So so everybody knows how important teaching is.
Sure, absolutely.
At the same time, like, teachers unions and colleges of education are built around how many teachers they have, not how many great teachers they have, because that's how their finances work. And when the incentives are around how many people, not how great the people are, no matter how many we have, you have to hire deeper into the pool. And more specifically, to bring this back to this,
standards.
Yeah, if you're a kid in the Bronx, you're way more likely to get an ineffective teacher than if you're a kid in Westchester. And that's about seniority assignment, and it's also about the fact that we take teachers who are young, who are not particularly well trained. We just talked about that, and because they don't have much control over their assignments, we send them to the toughest schools. And so that's terrible for the teacher, but it's really terrible for the student.
So it goes back to political decisions.
So when people say, let's get
you're very diplomatic.
No, I'm
are you
trying.
running for office?
No. When people say get the politics out of education, I'm like, how are you going to do that? Because education is politics. And so I just approach it as a political problem because it's a problem of power. And I think, again, like, this is a great segue. I didn't plan it as a great segue. It was a great segue. If you look at who opts out, you find people in districts who have way more money and way more political power opting out at a higher rate than folks who are in districts where they care about the certainty of whether or not their kid is equipped to actually compete in the labor market and be a real citizen at some point in the future. If you are, let's pick a ritzy town, like you're in the lower Hudson Valley, or you're out in Suffolk County. So Suffolk County is one of the places with very high rates of opt-out. You're born on third base and basically think you hit a triple. You got the right parents, you got the right skin color, you got the right household income. One of the things we found is that in the top 5% of districts that opt out, the median household income is double that of districts in the lowest 5% of opt out. So the more people opt out, the more money they tend to make. And that really grows out of, I would just say, I don't want to be dismissive about it, but it's maybe like an arrogance of privilege. So
and that privilege is of both wealth and color.
That's and location.
Okay.
And I mean, if you live in a place where you
value of home.
If you live in a place where you pay crazy property taxes,
right,
that's probably your most reliable predictor of school quality.
I'm looking through these numbers, but by the way, I'm not a numbers guy. I don't pretend to be.
I was an English major.
Exactly. So but you're a learned person. You've studied this. You've been around. You understand education. At least the game and politics. I don't mean to demean it, but it is a game that we're playing here. And it's interesting because all the top 5 cities in which students did opt in or opt out, and you can go crazy with looking at this. Now, the average person could give a rat's ass about this.
Right. Yeah.
Really.
Yeah.
Because they're saying my kid is just not learning.
Right.
Is the solution? I go back seriously. We throw money at it. People come up with ideas. There's charter movements. There's people with this and that and blue, and we get a new chancellor, and it turns over, and we get a new Congress, and God knows what'll be no child left behind, or whatever. The country's being left behind.
Right.
That's the problem. should we just socialize education? Should we just cut across this crap and just come up with a solution that really works for a capitalist system that cannot educate its own? If we claim to be so hot, and
Sure.
I'm asking you because again, you've seen everything. I think you probably know what the next game is going to be. No, seriously, so where's the solution here? It doesn't seem like we're ever going to be, because there's always a person running for governor. There's always a person running for the Senate. There's always a new president coming in. There's a mayor who's, whoever it may be. So the people making the decisions, first of all, aren't educators or even, it isn't like you running. Should it be done something? Socialize education.
So this is an interesting thing. So I feel like part of the problem is that we have lots of people in power who believe that there is one best way to deliver education for all kids. And I just violently disagree with that, because frankly, we have an education system that people think is sort of like public and equal, but it's wholly unequal, and it's actually not public because it's not public in the way that people think it is, because you normally get a private system of schools that come with your mortgage. Right, so if you live in the most expensive place in Tribeca, all of your neighbors are people who could live any other place. They're probably all college educated. The school that you go to is public, but let's be clear, a kid down the street who can't afford the rent, isn't going to be there, And you see that exclusivity all across the country, and that's actually the American system, that the fact that you buy your school with your house or with where you live,
but it isn't working.
So no, I totally agree with it, the fact that it's not working. I'm saying that the notion that assigning people to school based on where they live is the best way to make sure every kid gets a great education, I think it's just deeply misguided. It might be okay for some kids who have the right parents and who can afford to move to the right places, but I think there are lots of kids, actually I know there are lots of kids in Brooklyn, in Bed-Stuy, in Central Harlem, in Rochester, or in Yonkers, or in Buffalo, for whom that system absolutely does not work. And those ideas, right, like free, open to all, which I actually support, when subverted, give us a system we have now, which is deeply inequitable, deeply segregated, both in terms of who goes to school, the kind of resources people get at school, and until you sort of address the fact that maybe a better way to approach this is to make the system more differentiated, not less differentiated, I don't think you're going to get much change. Now this is also a political question though, which I know you're interested in, right? So the way things are right now enrich both politically and financially lots of people. So I'm not trying to hang nothing bad on anybody, but
I understand.
But it's there are teachers union raises money. There are lawyers and cafeteria vendors who work for school districts everywhere. There are construction firms who build buildings. The fact that our kids sort of are engines of taxation.
Are we giving people too many options? Should it be dictatorial?
So I don't think we're giving people too many options.
We're not?
I think giving people one option is not enough. And because when you give people one option, it's all about whether or not you can afford to buy a good one, right? If you give people several, it's about whether or not options are competing with one another. So it's it's not just about having an iPhone or a Galaxy.
If you had the next president's ear, what would Senor Bradford go and say, President-elect so-and-so, this is what you have to do even before you take office. This is the solution. What would you do?
Yeah, so three things. The first thing we talked about earlier.
I asked you for one. I'm getting
No,
three.
you're going to get
Great.
three.
Okay, there you go.
You're
There you
remembering
go.
threes, because if I'm talking to the president,
Great.
I'm going to give him three things.
Right.
The first one is really this investment in people, like we talked about. We know that there are amazing young people in America that want to teach,
Right.
and we have not organized the profession in a way that pays them the right way or supports them the right way so that they actually do it. So they go do other stuff.
That's
right?
one.
So that is one. The second one, because it is deeply important to me, is that it's public education is a goal. It doesn't have to be a delivery system. So there are places where there's a great school that a kid can't afford, or that's right down the street, or a neighborhood school run by the district that has a waiting list. That I want to make a point of this. There are lots of schools in New York that are run by the district that have long waiting lists because the district doesn't replicate the things it does well in a way that actually is suitable for families, right?
So you would tell the president, let's look at
That's right. Look at what's good and do more of it, right? In a way that doesn't take income or location into account. And then the third and the final thing is actually this. So without standards and without great information, right? Without knowing what our kids know and what they do not know, we can't make good decisions about what we want to do. We can't make decisions about whether or not this works or something else doesn't work. Now, in a world where you're a good driver, right, that can't include us getting rid of all the stop signs and all the stop lights and all the road rules because you think you're a good driver. And education is so personal that most people are like, I think I'm a good driver. Like, I don't need any of these signposts. But the rest of us do. And there are lots of kids who do. And so like the move, like Hillary Clinton is being lobbied sort of actively about this stuff on the Democratic side. Like Jeb Bush, who I would say is like the leader on the Republican side right now, is actually a strong proponent of standards and Common Core standards and assessments, and that was his record in Florida and whatever. Pulling the objectivity out of the system is only going to hurt people for whom, it's only going to hurt people who have the least political and social capital already.
You got me into a car that I don't want to be riding because you
don't want to get
you took the driver away, the fun away from this. It sounds reasonable. Let's see if the next president-elect will actually start dealing with this problem. I say socialize education. Derrell Bradford, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
And it's NICAN, but it's really ICAN.
Yeah, it's me can. Yeah.
Gerson Borrero for City and State TV. We'll see you right back here.